My sister smirked. "Look what I found, your little savings account," as my parents cheered and planned to spend every penny on her future. Then she waved the folder around like a trophy. 10 minutes later, federal agents showed up at the door. My sister held up the folder like a trophy, both arms raised, big grin. The kind of grin that knows it has an audience and is performing directly for it. The wine glasses caught the dining room light. My mother was already laughing. My uncle was shaking his head in amused disbelief. And my father was leaning back in his chair with the particular satisfaction of a man who has just watched something he orchestrated land exactly the way he planned. "Thanks for paying my tuition, little brother." The table erupted. I sat completely still. I had a glass of water in front of me. I remember focusing on it, the small ring it had left on the tablecloth, the way the light sat inside it. A trick I'd learned years ago for situations that required me to stay calm when everything in my body was screaming not to be. Because that folder wasn't a savings account. It wasn't a college fund. It wasn't a personal investment portfolio. It wasn't anything that belonged to my family or had anything to do with Vanessa's tuition or my father's plans or this dinner or any of the people in this room. And in approximately 10 minutes, every single one of them was going to understand exactly what it was. I just needed to let it play out. I should explain the kind of family I come from, because it matters for understanding how a dinner table full of adults could watch a woman wave around stolen federal documents and respond by applauding. My parents, Gerald and Miriam Calloway, built their understanding of fairness on a single operating principle. Vanessa needed things, and I was available to provide them. This wasn't malice exactly. It was something almost more insidious, a settled, unexamined assumption that had calcified over 20 years into something that felt to everyone inside it like common sense. Vanessa was 4 years older than me and had been since childhood, the kind of person whose needs arrived loudly and left consequences quietly. She was charming. She was funny. She was the person at every family gathering who made the room brighter and louder, who could make my uncle laugh until he cried, who gave toasts that everyone remembered. She was also, if you were paying attention, the person who had been generously funded through 3.5 years of a communications degree. She hadn't finished 2 gap years that produced nothing, a downtown apartment my parents had co-signed, and a car that my father made a down payment on 18 months ago, while simultaneously lecturing me about financial independence. I was the quiet one, the one who'd gotten a scholarship, put himself through a master's program in financial regulation, and taken a position with a federal agency doing compliance monitoring work that I was not by the terms of my employment permitted to discuss in detail. My parents interpreted my privacy as aloofness, my self-sufficiency as a personality flaw. "You don't need help," my mother would say, which was her way of explaining why I never received any. I'd moved back to the city 8 months ago after a posting in DC. I had a small apartment and a home office, and the office had a lock because the work I brought home occasionally required it. Monitoring files referenced documents, nothing that should ever leave a secured context. I'd noticed 3 weeks ago that something in the office had been moved, not dramatically, just the particular quality of disorder that tells you someone has tried to put things back and not quite succeeded. I'd done a quiet inventory and found that one folder was gone. I knew immediately who had taken it. Vanessa had been over the previous Sunday. She was the only person besides me who knew about the spare key my mother kept in the kitchen drawer. I did not call the police. I did not call my parents. I made one phone call to my supervisor, special agent in charge, Donna Reyes, who had been with the Department of Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Division for 19 years. I told her what had happened. I told her what was in the folder. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Okay, here's what we're going to do. The dinner was called a celebration. The invitation sent in a group text by my mother at 11:42 on a Tuesday morning, in the cheerful tone she reserved for events she'd already decided were good news, announced that Vanessa had been accepted to a graduate program in business administration and that the family was gathering Friday night to celebrate. No mention of the 3 failed semesters. No mention of the previous acceptance she'd let lapse. No mention of where the tuition money was coming from, though I had a developing theory about that. I went. Of course I went. I'd been advised to go. The table was set with the good dishes. My aunt and uncle were there, Miriam's brother Dennis and his wife Patrice, who had perfected the art of enthusiastic agreement with whoever in the room held the most social authority. There was wine. There was a roast. There were candles which my mother only used for what she considered proper occasions. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes late in a new jacket I hadn't seen before, and took the seat at the head of the table that technically belonged to my father, who seated it to her with the indulgent smile of a man enjoying the performance of his own generosity. I sat across from her. I had my phone in my jacket pocket. I had one job tonight, and it was to say as little as possible for as long as possible. Dinner was served. The conversation moved through its usual channels. Dennis's renovation project, Patrice's sister's recent divorce, my mother's comments on a neighbour's landscaping choices. Normal warm the particular domestic hum of a family that from the outside looked entirely functional. Then my father leaned back in his chair and said with the gravity of a man making an announcement, "This is a good moment." Vanessa looked at him. Something passed between them. The quick, coordinated glance of people who have rehearsed. She reached into the bag beside her chair and produced the folder. My folder. She set it on the table between the wine glasses and the bread basket, with a theatrical little flourish, and then she looked at me with a smile that had 26 years of accumulated older sibling superiority packed into it. Recognize this. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Happy surprise performed, but not entirely fake. She'd known this was coming. "We found your savings account," Vanessa said. "Well, Dad did some research and we figure it's more than enough to cover the program. Family helps family," my father said, firm, final. I looked at him, then at the folder, then back at him. "Where did you get that?" "The office," Vanessa said like it was obvious. "We used the spare key." She said we. She was including my father in the entry, which meant this had been planned, coordinated, and executed with parental approval. I put my hands flat on the table. "That office is locked for a reason," I said. "Those documents are locked away for a reason." "Oh, calm down," my father said. "It's a folder. It's not a savings account. Whatever it is, it covers tuition." He gestured at the folder with the relaxed authority of a man who has decided the conversation is already resolved. "We'll handle the transfer Monday." My Uncle Dennis leaned toward the folder. "How much are we talking?" Vanessa pulled out the top page and squinted at it. "What's Treasury operations?" she asked. The words hit the base of my spine. "Put that down," I said, quiet level. My father waved his hand. "Investment terminology. Don't worry about it." Vanessa kept reading. "What's federal custody authorization?" The table got slightly quieter, not silent, just a fraction less certain than it had been. Dennis frowned. Patrice looked up from her wine glass. "Vanessa," I said, still quiet, "please put the document down." She looked at me with the smile people wear when they've decided you're overreacting and they'd like you to know they've decided that. "Relax," she said. "You're always so—" And then she read the reference codes, specific codes, 12-digit alphanumeric identifiers assigned to active monitoring files by FinCEN's case management system, protected codes. to an ongoing federal investigation codes that, when read aloud in an unsecured location by an unauthorized individual, trigger an automated alert in the monitoring system. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Alert confirmed. I did not smile. I put my hand over the phone and left it there. To my future. Vanessa announced, standing up and raising her glass. Everyone raised theirs, and then the knock came 3 hits on the front door. Sharp, deliberate, the specific rhythm of someone who knocks like it's a statement. The table didn't quite stop. Conversations, tapered glasses paused mid-raise. My uncle made a small questioning sound. My father frowned toward the hallway. "Who comes to dinner at 8:30? Dennis said. "Maybe it's a neighbor," Patrice offered. 3 more knocks harder. My mother set down her glass and started to rise. My father waved her off and stood himself doing the thing he did when he wanted to be the one who handled situations. The slight squaring of the shoulders, the deliberate pace, the performance of unworried authority. He walked to the door and opened it. I watched his face from across the dining room. The color left it the way color leaves things when the body makes a unilateral decision to redirect blood somewhere more essential. 4 people stood on the porch. Dark jackets, 2 in the standard navy windbreakers, with agency lettering, 2 in plain clothes with credential cases already open. Expressions that had been calibrated over long careers to convey authority without aggression, which is somehow more frightening than aggression, because it leaves no room to bargain with emotion. Special Agent in Charge. Donna Reyes stood at the front. 19 years with FinCEN. Silver-streaked hair, reading glasses tucked into her collar, a face that had delivered bad news to people in expensive suits, often enough that she'd stopped registering their reactions. Behind her, Agent Marcus Webb, Financial Crimes Division, 12 years, and 2 colleagues whose names I'd been given but won't include here. Reyes spoke 1 sentence. "We need to talk about documents removed from a secured federal office." The dining room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in stages, like a sound system being turned down track by track. The conversation stopped, then the movement stopped, then even the ambient sounds of the room, the clink of settling glassware, the hum of the refrigerator bleeding through from the kitchen, seemed to recede. My father stood in the doorway with his hand still on the door handle. "I don't," he started. "Inside, please," Reyes said, not a question. They stepped into the house with the professional calm of people who have done this many times and have learned that calm is its own form of authority. Reyes moved to the dining room entrance and stopped. Webb stood slightly behind and to her left. The other 2 remained near the door. Reyes's eyes moved around the table, taking inventory. When they reached the folder, my folder still open, the reference page sitting on top where Vanessa had left it, something in her expression registered and filed. She placed her credential case on the dining table next to the breadbasket with a small, precise click. Who accessed these records? 12 people in the room, 12 faces turning, and then in the way that crowds resolve when they need someone to blame, every eye moved to me. I shook my head once. Not me. The eyes moved to Vanessa. She was still standing. The wine glass was still in her hand. The color had left her face in a different way than it had left my father's. His had been sudden, like a switch. Hers was gradual, a slow draining, the way realization moves through a person who is trying to find an exit and discovering there isn't one. She set the glass down. "Aye, ma'am," Reyes said. Her voice hadn't changed at all. "I'll ask one more time. Who accessed these records and removed them from the secured office at 4400 Meridian Avenue?" Vanessa looked at my father. My father looked at the floor. The silence in the room had a texture now. The particular texture of a space where the social architecture has collapsed and nobody has figured out yet what to replace it with. My Uncle Dennis had his hands flat on the table. Patrice was absolutely still. My mother's face had gone through shock and arrived somewhere that looked from the outside like a very quiet and very private kind of grief. Agent Webb moved to the table and with gloved hands carefully closed the folder and placed it in an evidence bag he'd produced from his jacket. The documents were removed on Sunday the 14th, Reyes said. We have keycard access logs from the building security footage from the hallway and a monitored alert that was triggered tonight when protected reference codes were read aloud in an unsecured location. She looked at Vanessa, then at my father. I'd strongly recommend that both of you contact attorneys before saying anything further. My father opened his mouth. Gerald. My mother's voice flat and final, the voice she used when she was done. He closed his mouth. I leaned back in my chair. I folded my hands in my lap, and I looked at my sister across the table, across the wine glasses and the good dishes and the candles my mother had lit for a celebration, and I said very quietly, "Go ahead, Vanessa. Tell them about the spare key." What followed was not fast. Nothing involving federal agencies ever is. That's the thing movies get wrong. They make it dramatic and rapid, all raised voices and handcuffs. The reality is slower, and in its own way more devastating. Its forms and procedures, and the methodical disassembly of an evening that was supposed to be a celebration. Reyes separated my father and Vanessa into different rooms within 20 minutes. Webb took statements from the remaining family members at the table, working through them one at a time with a recorder and a legal pad. My Aunt Patrice, I noticed, answered every question in a tone that made clear she was fully committed to having seen nothing known, nothing, and having opinions about nothing. Smart woman. Dennis tried at one point to take charge of the situation to be helpful and authoritative in the way he was at family gatherings, the designated handler of problems. Webb looked at him with the patient, practiced expression of a man who encounters this response approximately 4 times a week, and said gently but conclusively, "Sir, I need you to wait." Dennis sat back down. I was interviewed last in the kitchen by Reyes herself. She asked me to walk through the timeline from when I first noticed the folder was missing. I did. She asked about the spare key, the access, the sequence of events that led to this evening. I answered everything. At the end, she looked at me for a moment. "You could have called us the day you noticed," she said. It wasn't quite an accusation, more of an observation. "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you—" I thought about that, about the years of dinners, and the decisions my parents had always made about was, and what I was for, about Vanessa's face, in the moment before she read the codes, so completely catastrophically certain that she had won something. I needed them to understand what they'd actually done. I said, "Not be told, understand." Reyes looked at me for another moment. Then she made a note on her legal pad and closed it. "We'll be in touch," she said. The charges when they came took 11 days to formalize. Vanessa was charged under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1030, unauthorized access to protected federal records, and a secondary charge related to the removal of documents from a secured government facility. My father was charged as a co-conspirator. The evidence showed through phone records and text messages obtained via warrant that he had directed the entry and been aware of the nature of the documents. He had known they were from a federal office. He had decided that didn't matter. My mother was not charged. I'd like to say that was a relief, but what I actually felt was more complicated than that something flatter and colder that I didn't have a clean name for. The family's attorney, a civil litigator named Robert Granger, who had handled my father's business disputes for years, and it became immediately clear, entirely out of his depth in a federal criminal matter, managed to reach me by phone 9 days after the dinner. He spent 4 minutes explaining that the family hoped this could be resolved quietly and that surely there was a way to. I let him finish. Then I said, Robert, I didn't file the charges. The Department of Treasury did. You should be talking to the assistant U.S. attorney assigned to the case, not me. He was quiet. Who is that? He asked. I'd start with the FinCEN liaison office, I said. They'll direct you. I hung up. Vanessa's attorney, a federal defense lawyer named Patricia Chung, who was actually competent, which I respected, reached a plea arrangement 4 months later. Vanessa pleaded to the access charge, 18 months probation community service, a fine, and a permanent federal record that would follow her through every background check for the rest of her life. My father's situation was more complicated, as situations involving words like conspiracy and federal documents tend to be. The process moved through the system, the way those processes do, slowly, expensively, with a toll on everything around it. He retained his own attorney, a man who billed at rates that started rapidly dismantling the finances my father had spent his career assembling. The graduate program rescinded Vanessa's acceptance when the charges became public record. This was automatic. Their policy on applicants with pending federal criminal matters was clear, and had been for years. The apartment, the new jacket, the planned shopping trips, the car my father was going to help her buy, gone just like that. I heard about most of this second-hand through my mother, who called me twice during those months. The calls were short and strange. She didn't apologize exactly, but she didn't defend anyone either. She mostly asked how I was doing in the careful, slightly formal tone of a person who is relearning how to talk to someone they thought they knew. I told her I was fine. I was mostly. I changed the lock on the office. I changed the spare key location. Small adjustments, practical ones. 8 months after the dinner, I drove past my parents' house on the way to something else, and slowed without planning to. The lights were on in the living room. Through the front window, I could see the blue flicker of the television and the shape of my mother in her chair. The dining room was dark. The good dishes were presumably back in the cabinet. I thought about that table, all those faces lit up and laughing, absolutely certain they'd outmaneuvered me. The folder passing around like a party favor. Vanessa standing up with her glass raised to my future. I pulled back onto the road. There's a version of this story where I feel satisfied about how it ended. Clean vindication justice delivered the scales balanced, and part of me does feel that. Part of me thinks about Raya's placing her credentials on the dinner table next to the breadbasket and feels something that isn't quite satisfaction, but is adjacent to it. But the larger part of me just feels the weight of what it cost. Not money, not time, not the professional complications of having federal documents removed from my office. The other cost, the one you can't invoice. The kind that shows up at 2 a.m. when you're lying in a quiet apartment thinking about the family you were supposed to have versus the family you actually have, and trying to figure out if there's any version of the future where those two things eventually converge. I don't know the answer to that yet. What I know is this. They looked at me and saw someone they could use, someone without edges, someone who would absorb whatever they decided to take and say nothing and stay at the table and keep coming to the dinners. They were wrong about that. They'd been wrong about it for a long time. The difference is that now they know it too. That's not nothing. It's not everything, but it's not nothing. And sometimes, most times actually, that has to be enough.